Yesterday, I had to give the marriage covenant talk to the couples who are going to be married in our deanery. And I was quite surprised when I went downstairs to find that there were only 7 couples. Someone's not happy. And so I thought to myself, in the past, there's been up to 20, 25 couples. And so I explained to them that one of the reasons why there were so few couples there was that there are 2 things that we're struggling with in our culture. The first is that we are struggling with this very definition of marriage. There are those who want to redefine marriage. They want to redefine it. They want to make it something different than what we've all been accustomed to biblically for thousands of years. And the second reason is that there are fewer people who are getting married. They are cohabitating. They are living together. They're living in sin. And so those couples who are Catholic, who are getting married, few of them are being married in the Catholic Church because they do not understand this very word and essence of covenant. They don't understand what a covenant is. And so there is a world of difference between going down the street and being married by a justice of the peace and a couple who walks into the church and married in the church. One is a contract, the other is a covenant. And you know that there are 2 types of contracts. There are oral contracts and there are written contracts. However, both are binding. Both are binding. But in a contract, there's an exchange of something. There's an exchange of property. In the contract, I get this and you get that. So I might hire somebody to paint my house, and for their services, they get my money. So there's an expectation, you see. But all that is something that's legal. It's legally binding. But in the covenant, when people enter the church, covenant is like a contract, only it's much different. There's an exchange of something, but it isn't property, because people are not property to be exchanged. Covenant is an exchange of persons. In the covenant, I get you and you get me. You see? And so the people who come into the church and who bind themselves to one another are not only being yoked to one another, but they're being yoked and bound to Christ. In the covenant, 3 people marry, not 2. The couple is bound to one another, but they are bound to Christ. And I would say to you, it is this loss of meaning and understanding of covenant and its necessity and its essence why we are struggling the way we are. Let me give you some background about this first reading and what is really going on from the book of the prophet Nehemiah. You see, Nehemiah is a governor who's been appointed by the king of Persia. The Persians have just conquered the Babylonian kingdom. And the Israelite people have been in exile for 450 years. Now, if you remember correctly, I've tried to teach you in the past that for the Israelite people to be in possession of the land was a big deal. Because possession of the land was a divine gift. God gave them the land. But it was also a sign that while they were in possession of their land, it was a sign to them that they were in right relationship with God. And so to be dispossessed of the land, to find yourself off the land, to find yourself in exile, was also a sign. It was a sign that somehow you had violated the covenant, and now you were experiencing the consequences of the violation of the covenant. So Nehemiah is a governor who's appointed by the king of Persia, who's going to allow the Jewish people to go back and resettle the land. However, Nehemiah understands something. Nehemiah understands that simply allowing the people to go back and to be restored and to resettle the land is going to be fruitless unless they understand that first and foremost they need to be reconciled to God. So Nehemiah has Ezra the priest stand on a wooden platform, and he begins to read from the book of the law. And he gathers them at sunrise. I'm going to bet you that if I made you come here at sunrise and you were here till sunset and I started reading the scriptures to you, by the end of the day you'd weep too. But you'd be weeping for a much different reason than they were. You see, what happened when he began to read from the book of the law and began to interpret it for them, they began to realize that they had spent all that time as slaves and as vassals to all of these other kingdoms because they had forsaken God. That their ancestors were responsible for the reason that they had to spend as much time as they did in Babylon. And now they're back on the land, and Ezra the priest is reading the law and he's explaining it to them, and all of a sudden they begin to realize and they begin to understand what it means to have the land as a divine gift. And they begin to weep. They begin to weep for all of the years that they have been off the land and out of right relationship with God. They begin to weep. And now they're weeping also because they're grateful that finally God had restored them. I think this is an important point for you and I to understand, because I want to say to you, this is where our country is headed. You see, the greatness of these people has nothing to do with the land. It has nothing to do with the prosperity that they enjoy. It has everything to do with the God who gives them the land and the prosperity. And when people forget who and what it is that makes them great, then they're bound to suffer the consequences that the Israelite people suffered, by the way, over and over and over again. Because exile was not something that happened once, it happened often. Let me read you something. You know, in 1968, Pope Paul VI wrote an encyclical called Humanae Vitae. And in the encyclical, he made some predictions. This is 1968. He said this: a man who grows accustomed to the use of contraceptive methods may forget the reverence due to a woman. By disregarding her physical and emotional equilibrium, the Pope wrote, man would eventually view woman as a being who doesn't deserve care and affection. Very interesting, there was an article in the New York Times, January 13th of this year, by a guy by the name of Alex Williams. And I'm going to read you some of the excerpts of his column in the New York Times. Shockingly, a similar line of thinking was expressed by Alex Williams, a reporter for the New York Times, in a column published on January 13th, titled, "The End of Courtship." Williams's essay argues that an over-reliance on technology and years of living in a hookup culture have so thoroughly muddled the minds of 20-somethings that they no longer know how to navigate the waters of courtship. Williams says that instead of dinner and a movie, young adults rendezvous over phone texts, Facebook posts, instant messages, and other non-dates that are leaving them confused about how to land a boyfriend or a girlfriend. Google and Facebook now accomplish what first dates used to, Williams argues. Unfortunately, many of the relationships young adults experience are mere images of their hookup past, a past that they do not know how to escape. The Times' decision to publish Williams's essay is remarkable because it belies everything the media and cultural elites stand for. Primarily, the idea that consensual protected sex is safe and harmless, that birth control and abortion are benign and inconsequential, that intercourse before marriage is generally a positive thing, and that masturbation is healthy and normally active, a normal activity. I believe the goals of the sexual revolution have finally become a reality, he says. As Williams' essay indicates, men are elevating their profession, their bachelor lifestyle, and other oftentimes trivial interests above starting a family. Similarly, women encouraged by people like Sandra Fluck and organizations like Planned Parenthood no longer see motherhood or human life as a gift. They see it as an obstacle that must be overcome in order to live a meaningful, successful life. It looks like Pope Paul VI was right all along. I'm going to make a prediction. And I'm going to predict that our children, our grandchildren, someday, like those people that you heard talked about in the first reading from Nehemiah, our grandchildren someday are going to listen to someone proclaim the truth to them in the Holy Gospel. And he's going to break it open for them. He's going to explain to them why they've had to suffer, why they've been dispossessed. And they're going to weep. They're going to weep for the same reasons those people wept, because they're going to understand what you and I left them as an inheritance. And then they are going to get on their knees and they're going to pray, and God is going to restore them. God is going to restore them. We are headed for something that is not good. And we now need to pray, be willing to pray, and not only to pray, but be willing to make sacrifices for all of those people out there who will not pray and will not sacrifice. Tomorrow is too late. It has to be now. Because we don't have any time left. Prayer can move the heart of God. Prayer changes things. Prayer changes people. We have a chapel here that is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I believe that we as a people, God's people, if we are willing to get on our knees and we are willing to make the sacrifices that are necessary, we can turn this nation around. with the help of God. We don't have to go that route. We don't have to lose everything that we have and become dispossessed because we have failed to understand the essence of the covenant that God has established with us. It's one of the reasons why Bishop Labashi came a week or so ago and started to talk about the necessity of saving our Catholic schools because of what they offer these kids, of what they're not getting in the public schools. It isn't about the education, it's the formation. It's the formation. These 7 couples that I gave this marriage covenant talk to yesterday, my brothers and sisters, they're all living together. They don't know their faith. They don't know that what they're doing is wrong because what they see out there, they're told that it's fine. It isn't so much their sin as it is ours. It's ours. It's ours if we fail to teach them the truth and to teach them the difference between what is right and wrong and good and bad. It isn't easy for me to stand up here and say the things that I'm saying. These are hard sayings. They're tough things, but they need to be said. Someone needs to stand up and rally the troops. Someone has to stand up and begin to call it as it is and call it what it is. We are headed into the darkness. Only God can help us now. Only God can help us now. We must be willing to pray. Paul VI said this in 1968. And now it is 2013. Less than 40 years. And look where we are. Look where we are. You see, Jesus stood up in the synagogue and he began to proclaim from the book of the prophet Isaiah, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me. He's anointed me to bring glad tidings to the poor, to release to the sick, the captives, to restore the eyesight of the blind." It wasn't about restoring them to the land. It was about restoring them to right relationship. That's our problem. We need to be restored to right relationship.